Hello, welcome to the Federal Project Management Series. Our topic today is integrated project teams. We'll talk about integrated project charters and TechStat. The topics that we are going to cover for this particular learning exercise will be some definitions. I'll cover some of the relative project management certifications that are some of the best practices and industry standards for the federal government. The ones that are most recognized, I should say. I'll give you some areas of focus so you can look at perhaps gaps in your skill set and look to remediate those or grow on those. I'll talk a little bit about a TechStat definition. I won't go into too much detail because we have a different course that's more in-depth on TechStat with project management. I'll give you the overview of integrated project teams and charters. I'll also introduce the concept of the Integrated Project Planning and Management Framework, or IPPM. And lastly, I'll introduce that relationship to capital planning and investment control and how OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, requires project managers to participate in the capital planning process in terms of reporting. As your course instructor, I have been doing this for a long time. I'm not a professional instructor. I'm actually a practitioner of this work and have been for over 25 years. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Zen Federal, and I have a variety of affiliations. You may be accessing this content through Fit Sourcing, Udemy, Talent Spring, or another vendor. I have been in this role for over 25 years, 13 as Executive Director of the Federal Capital Planning and Investment Control Forum. And almost all of my postgraduate education is in this area. I studied with National Defense University, obtaining a master's in Chief Information Officer Studies and Information Assurance. My Master's of Science is in Information Management from Syracuse University. And I'm not sure if you can see my little I Love Me wall behind me, but there's my East Carolina University degree as well. Go Pirates. So I have many years writing business cases, reviewing them, becoming a project and then a program and then a portfolio manager. I have reviewed, scored, analyzed, and improved business cases for years. I've prepared congressional testimony for congressional hearings. I've met with Congress people. I've worked directly with Office of Management and Budget, General Accountability Officers, all the C-suite executives over the years. And at one time, I was a co-author of a publication called the Capital Planning and Investment Control Guidebook. So hopefully all of this experience that I have will be concise and consolidated into these topics so we can get smart about those together. You will see this slide at the end of the presentation, but this is my contact information. You can reach me on my website at zenfederal.com. I have a link provided to my LinkedIn profile where you can follow me for more updates as courses and content become available. And there's my personal email with my little headshot at the bottom, j@zenfederal.com. So feel free to reach out to me with your questions and comments. And if you like what you saw today, please give us a favorable review as it helps us to educate others through the recommendation and referral process. Having been a certified instructor for about 10 years, I have charged tens of thousands of dollars to contractors and companies to provide on-site instructor-led training behind closed doors in executive meeting rooms across the government. My goal in providing this content through computer-based learning and distance learning is to make it accessible to folks that either don't have corporate budgets or federal government inroads, but have to get smart about these concepts to apply for project management jobs and transfer skills within the federal government, where we have more demand than we have supply of qualified professionals. So hopefully if this content is reaching you, this is going to get smarter, help you get smarter about applying any project management skills or expertise you have within the federal government. And it's going to help you pair your understanding with the guidance, laws, and drivers that are specific to the federal environment. And some of this is even transferable into state and local governments or other types of organizations. Hopefully, if you're watching this, perhaps you're interested in applying for jobs in the federal government, or you're fairly new to it, or you need continuing professional education. So at the end of these computer-based learning sessions, you'll be able to print out a certificate and use that for your continuing professional education credit. So in this course, we're going to talk about IT project management in the federal government. We'll talk about integrated project teams. We'll talk a little bit about some TechStat concepts and how that rolls together. We'll talk about an integrated project and program management methodology framework. And I'm going to try to tie all these concepts together. While we won't go into a lot of detail in all the different concepts, I'll lay the groundwork and then identify some of the other courses that I offer in some of these other topics. This will allow you to check yourself if you're already in the federal government to make sure that you're tracking with the civilian guidance or the DoD doctrine. Otherwise, if you're new to this, it will help you understand why it's so important that you look at the federal legislation, the guidance, the compliance requirements, in addition to whatever education you have in project management concepts. Because in the civilian world, things work a little bit differently, and it's important that you understand what governs federal project management. Towards the end, I'll tie that to capital planning and investment control concepts for you. So I'd like to start by introducing some of the common problems that are across the federal enterprise when it comes to project management, oversight, and accountability. First, a lot of people underestimate program complexity within the government. And you have to understand that even some of the components within departments in the government are larger than Fortune 500 companies. The federal government enterprise is the largest disseminator of information in the world. And when you underestimate program complexity, then you're underestimating requirements, scope, and risk. Oftentimes, there's a lack of firm leadership or commitment and sponsorship. I cannot tell you over the years the number of students that have come to me in my classes and said, I loved this class and I wish my boss and the CIO or the CFO would come and take this class with me. Because sometimes what we do in the tactical layers, yes, there is a strategic mandate to do it, but a lot of times when you get appointees or folks out of the commercial space that haven't been raised in the federal space, they have no idea what they're walking into in terms of legislative requirements, and that causes some problems. So what you really want to look for if you're going to project, program, or portfolio manage in the government, ideally you want to look at executives who have grown up in the federal space or have successfully made their mark in the federal space, because those are strong indicators that they really understand what they're doing. Also, another challenge is poor cross-functional communication. A lot of times the government works in silos and doesn't look across their own component or their own agency or department, let alone the federal enterprise, to see who may be doing similar types of projects and programs and where the best practices may be. And by working in a silo, sometimes technology and best practices and program management expertise doesn't reach you. So it's important to have that cross-functional communication. Lack of integrated planning. In the federal government, recently there was a new act that passed the legislative branch. It's called the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, or FITARA, which really addresses some of that lack of integrated planning. We'll get into more in-depth ways that that's going to address these problems as we go through the slides. No defined success metrics. That's a big one. Or poorly defined success metrics. Lack of broad change management. Misaligned stakeholder expectations. Inadequate program management skills. We'll touch on that in certifications as well. And lack of resources. To provide you a little bit of a background about what we're going to be teaching, it's important to understand that just the discretionary budget piece of the United States budget annually sets aside $80 to $100 billion a year for IT projects that influence every aspect of a department's mission. These IT programs must deliver that value to their customers, which are their constituents and their taxpayers. And no matter how successful project teams are in delivering an IT project within certain cost and schedule parameters, it's still going to be a failure if it doesn't meet the needs and requirements of a customer. So the federal government's answer to some of the problems that we just reviewed is the introduction of the Integrated Project Team, or IPT. And the IPT instructions or guidance provides teams with key operating principles to ensure consistent and effective management of projects. Now, I have gone and obtained a government IPT charter that I will provide you in the handouts as one example. Don't worry about the fact that it's a government document, because first, it's not containing any specific government information that would be classified or required any sort of special clearance to review. It is an empty template. Second, it is in the public domain and can be found through a search engine. So I'm not bringing something outside the government that isn't already free in the public domain, as well as those folks that are watching this course are very likely going to be U.S. citizens and taxpayers, and you've already paid for it. So in the files section, I'm going to have my team upload the Department of Veterans Affairs IPT template for you, that you can also pause your training, open that up, and follow along as I structured some of this content based on that IPT charter and others in the government to make sure that we gave you some laws and best practices. Let me introduce you to some concepts that are most commonly recognized as defined through the Project Management Body of Knowledge, PMBOK. That is a body of knowledge that is considered to be an industry standard and industry best practice through the Project Management Institute. So these three definitions are some of the most common standards that are accepted both on the federal and the civilian, as well as the private sector disciplines of project management. So we'll start with a project. That's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. In the federal government, a project has to have a life cycle or a useful life of 2 years or less. Then you get to the program level. That's a group of related projects managed in a coordinated way to obtain benefits and control not available from individual management. Now, before we get to the portfolio level definition, some of you may have another grouping in here called investments. And we talk a little bit more about that in the capital planning and investment control training that I offer. But if you have investments, they may not be the same as projects, and they may not be the same as programs. Investments could be projects, investments could be programs or projects could have investments and be other things as well. So the federal government definition of an investment is slightly different and not necessarily applicable to this specific teaching. A portfolio is a collection of programs grouped together to facilitate effective management of work to meet strategic business objectives. I actually am building a portfolio management and FEDucational learning course that we will be offering. It's not ready yet, but we will get you there. And as you start to see these different learning modules and learning opportunities come out, you will see some interplay and some interconnectivity as I try to connect all the dots of how these things all sort of relate to one another through the governance and capital planning processes that are instituted by the federal government. So there are a variety of appropriate certifications that a federal government employee or contractor could have that are acceptable for hiring and managing these types of approaches. Now, some people have already heard of the Project Management Institute's Project Management Professional Certification. They also have an Emerging Portfolio Manager certification, and their definitions and their body of knowledge are quite familiar and quite popular. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, I actually have a Master's of Science in Information Management. That master's degree contains the project management body of knowledge and the PMP training, although I possess it as a degree instead of as a proprietary certification. One of the things that federal hiring managers are not often familiar with is that someone who has an MBA or a different master's in these disciplines has the core competencies of a PMP. They've learned them through a university or accredited college versus a private training course. So when you are a hiring manager, if you are requiring a PMP, technically by law and through the Department of Labor policies, a master's in these areas actually supersedes a PMP. Some other examples of certifications that are offered are the Federal Acquisition Institute's Federal Acquisition Certification that can be for project managers, contracting officers, or contracting officer technical representatives. And that has a level 1, a junior level, a level 2, considered mid or journeyman level, and then a level 3, which is your subject matter expert level. In the government, the size of the project, program, or portfolio has different definitions, and the level of certification you hold qualifies and entitles you to manage at the different defined thresholds within the government. We won't go into too much detail about that in this particular session, but some of that information can be found on the Federal Acquisition Institute's website. The FAI has sort of a fraternal twin in the certification arena, and that is with the defense side of the federal government, and that's the DIWEA, or Defense Authorization Workforce Improvement Act certification, which has the companion 3 levels and is trained very similarly on the defense side. So if you are a federal employee on the civilian side, you're more likely to be familiar with the Federal Acquisition Institute's certification. If you're on the defense side, you may have the DIWEA certification. They're very similar, and there are reciprocity arrangements in between both sides of the government. So you only have to be one or the other, not both. And this is specific to federal employees. Contractors traditionally don't carry a federal acquisition or a DIWEA certification unless they're coming out of the government into the private sector. Also, there's something called a Prince 2 certification. Prince 2 is actually a British European certification that has a heavy project management focus on earned value management, which is helpful when working in development projects that have development, modernization, enhancement, software development life cycles. It's more IT specific, and it's a very rigorous, very prestigious certification. We're lucky to have Prince 2 certified folks when we can find them in the U.S. federal government. And then the other 2 that I have listed here are the Capital Planning Professional and the Capital Planning Professional Instructor. These certifications are affiliated with the CPIC, or Capital Planning and Investment Control Forum, CPIC Forum. I carry both of those certifications, as well as my master's degree and some other certifications like GRC and CJIT, which aren't necessarily requirements for project management, but are helpful when you start getting into the enterprise level governance of IT in the public and private sector. Some examples of other courses that I've completed that we're getting ready to launch. I provide instructions for how to navigate the federal government business cases. And I most recently obtained and used the FY22 guidance that OMB released in 2020. Since, everything has to have a useful life of 2 years or more, this is the most current guidance as of the time of this recording. I anticipate that every May, the new guidance continues to come out. So I will be amending those business case instructions annually as time permits. I've also recorded a session on Introduction to Federal Portfolio Management and Portfolio Stat for those folks that are leveling up to managing portfolios of investments. I have provided another course like this on project management that dives into the TechStat process and the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act requirements for that TechStat. And then I've created a mini module for how to get a job in CPIC. And it's not just CPIC. That works for trying to get into the government as an IT specialist or a business analyst or a project manager. That particular module is really useful for just coming up to speed and learning how to be competitive for those jobs. If you're looking for work and you would like to come into the federal government, or you're having trouble sort of leveling up and making yourself competitive for these federal government and contractor jobs, you're welcome to make a request via email to book some time with me for a review of your resume, to have a mentoring or counseling session. We charge an hourly fee for my time for that, but I'm happy to sit down with you, review what you have, what you know, and then make some recommendations. I would encourage you to send your resume to our fit sourcing team at the appropriate email, recruiting@fitsourcing.org, as well as any references, cover letter, any clearance details you have, your educational background, any certificates of completion, like these types of little webinars and learning opportunities that you're getting, and any salary details or salary history that you have. I know a lot of people that work in this field. I was the executive director of the CPIC Forum for 13 years. I was almost constantly helping to refer people into positions for interviews. I know a lot of CEOs and presidents of companies around the Washington Beltway and nationwide. I know a lot of recruiters. I know a lot of folks in this industry. And if you don't know how to network, engaging with us, maybe we can help you get there through Zen Federal or Fit Sourcing. You're welcome to follow me on LinkedIn as we put out new training, new information. I often share jobs and internships that are shared with me. Make sure you keep track of your training certificates of completion. And in LinkedIn, you can maintain a summary of your courses up to 50. And recruiters and people that are vetting you for positions really like to see all those courses that you've taken that are relevant to your area of growing expertise. Again, here is my contact information. If you need to reach me or follow us, we love positive reviews of our training. If you don't like something, email me and let me fix it before you just complain, because I'm learning how to do this as a new platform. I have been an instructor-led course instructor for many years, but this is a little bit of a different platform for me. So I'm open to constructive criticism. I welcome your comments, and we love those positive reviews, and we need those positive reviews to stay successful. So feel free to reach out to my team at Zen Federal. There's my personal email, j@zenfederal.com. And there's our LinkedIn profile for Zen Federal and me. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for participating in our learning activity today.